Good morning, and thank you for joining us this morning with this webinar of living and working in Mauritius. My name is Johan Strauss. I'm the host for the day. I'm the Business Development Director for BTG Consulting. And joining me today on the panel is Boris Pellegrin, the Managing Director of BTG Management Services in Mauritius, Keelan van der Balt, partner and head of the Mauritius office for Regan van Roy, Hugo van Zyl of Tax Forum and Tax Migration, as well as Sean Palmer of Dodo Relocations. This morning we're going to just discuss briefly all the changes in the Mauritian budget that was introduced and looking at what the impact will be on South Africans that wanting to relocate or move to the island. So when we look at the permits, there are basically two types of permits that you get. You get a residence permit and you get a permanent residence permit. The two is basically one will give you, allow you to live on the island for a longer period of time. If we look at the changes that they are proposing, you have the non-citizen holding immovable property under the integrated resort scheme, the invest hotel scheme, the property development scheme, or the smart city scheme. And the changes that they propose would be to reduce the amount to invest from 500,000 to 375,000. Parents of holders of a valid residence permit or occupation permit will have the status of resident. So as I mentioned, the permanent residence proposed to be extended from 10 years to 20 years. The occupation permit for investor, self-employed and residence permit as a retired non-citizen is proposed to be extended from 3 to 10 years. And the occupational permit as a professional and residence permit as a retired non-citizen may now invest in other businesses, provided that they are not employed by the business, does not manage the business, and does not derive any salary or employment benefits. So some of the changes that's been introduced is for the investor permit, where the initial investment was $100,000. This is proposed to be reduced to $50,000. The occupation permit as a professional, they've included the pharmaceutical industry under the minimum 30,000 rupees or $750 a month salary. Occupation permit as a self-employed, they've introduced an 800,000 rupees or $20,000 per annual income requirement. And the residence permit as a retired non-citizen, where you have an initial transfer of $1,500 at the time of application and a monthly transfer of $1,500 with an aggregate of at least $18,000 per annum. So welcome again to all of our attendees. Mauritius is really about to sign into law some very interesting and exciting changes, not only to the resident and work permits, but also to owning property and allowing you to work and live on the island, making it a definite must to consider when looking at a Plan B for South Africans. Boris, I'm going to ask you the first question. You've lived on the island now for 12 years. Do you think these measures introduced will attract South Africans to come and set up shop in Mauritius, and have the government addressed the correct issues?
Thanks, Johan. Yeah, and welcome to all the participants. In short, yeah, I think the measures are definitely aimed at attracting more investors. I think a bit of the backdrop of what's happened post-COVID, the economy has taken a downturn. Tourism has been hit. So a lot of governments worldwide have all these new measures to try and promote easing the burden, the tax burden, also promoting investment, further investment. And I think that's the main reason a lot of these measures have been put forward. I think as I spoke to the panelists a bit earlier, if you looked at the statistics that the government does send out, the foreign direct investment into Mauritius, I think the two leading investors are Europe via France and South Africa. And the sectors most invested in is in the property sector. So that's really fueling investment. So the way the government has pitched the budget, has pitched the act, is quite interesting because it's going to focus on those. They're dropping the level of investment that you have to do in property so you can get residents. And they're also dropping or extending the duration of residence permits, permanent residence, occupation permits, and all that. So it all adds up. If you're attracting investors, they buy property, they're going to pay some property taxes. That adds to the coffers. If you're extending the residence permits, that means you've got more employees staying longer, adding to the fiscus. And why not introduce a wealth tax? I think there was the solidarity levy also included in this, which will boost the finances as well. So, but all in all, I think, yeah, it's very, very aimed at attracting foreign direct investment and business into Mauritius. It's going to help investors come and settle here, live here. It's ease of doing business here, security, no exchange controls. So all those things kind of add up to add to the attraction of Mauritius, and even more so now with these new measures implemented. But as with everything, before you pack up and go, a bit of good planning before you land over here is always required.
Yeah.
So all in all, positive.
Okay, no, good. Keelan, as we discussed now, the good changes that was made, there's unfortunately some challenges as well that they've introduced. Would you mind sharing with us some changes in the solidarity levy and the national pension fund that was proposed?
Yeah, that's right. So as you and Boris have said, one of the big messages from the budget was to make Mauritius more and more attractive to foreign investment and to attracting expats. And a lot of the permit changes have facilitated that. But unfortunately, some tax increases have been mooted, which will likely have the opposite effect. So one of the key benefits Mauritius has always had compared to other, let's say, tax favorable jurisdictions is that apart from the corporate tax rate being low, the personal tax rate has also been low. So the personal tax rate has essentially been 15% with above 650,000 rupees. And in 2017, an additional tax called the solidarity levy was introduced, which applied above 3.5 million rupees, about $80,000. That, you know, people were happy to pay. So it meant that they paid 15%, but above 3.5 million rupees, they paid 20%. Then in the first budget speech, it was announced that this solidarity levy would be increased to a whopping 25% and that it would only apply to Mauritian citizens. Obviously, that was wildly unpopular, both in terms of the increase and in terms of the lack of parity between Mauritian citizens and Mauritian tax residents. So there was a lot of discussion, a lot of debating in Parliament. Then it was announced that the solidarity levy would be capped to 10% and would apply to everyone. So we all assumed that that meant that effectively the solidarity levy would apply as normal, but increase from 5% to 10%, which would give you a top tax rate of 25%, which is still very low compared to, let's say, Ireland or the Netherlands or other kind of tax favorable jurisdictions for individuals. However, when the finance bill came out in early July, the wording of the draft legislation, which has still not been promulgated, but we're expecting it to be enacted basically any day now, the wording said that a 25% solidarity levy would indeed apply, but it would be capped to 10% of total income. We believe that that will be corrected eventually, but it is not going to change in the current version of the finance bill. So what that means is that for people who earn above 3 million rupees, and the threshold has reduced from 3.5 million to 3 million, So for people who earn above 3 million rupees, the solidarity levy will apply at a rate of 25%. It will be capped to 10% of total income, but based on the way the arithmetic works out, the cap will only kick in on income above 5 million. So it means for salary earners who earn between 3 and 5 million, the income above 3 million is taxed at 40%. So the 15% standard and the 25% solidarity levy, which is very high. For individuals who earn above 5 million, only a 10% solidarity levy applies above 3 million. So it means that, let's call it, middle earners are adversely impacted. We do think it is an oversight, but that's the way the legislation stands at the moment. The other big change is in terms of the pension scheme. So the old National Pension Fund has been replaced with what's called a contribution sociale générale, and that has essentially the same required pension contributions. So it's a type of national pension scheme, or like social security levy, non-refundable. All you will be entitled to is a base Mauritian salary if you're still here when you retire at 65. And the big change is that under this new threshold, no caps applied. So the rates on the National Pension Fund were 3% for employees, 6% for employers, but they were capped to a very low amount. Now that under the CSG, the caps have disappeared. So on all income, the employee will have to pay 3% into this pension fund, which is essentially another form of tax, and the employer will have to pay 6%. Now, this has been wildly unpopular, as you can imagine. So the rumor doing the rounds is that this has been put on hold, and it will not apply from 1 September this year as it was supposed to. But we won't know that until the final bill is promulgated. But
Yeah.
overall, that means a significant increase in personal taxes for individuals.
Yeah, so I mean, that sounds kind of counterproductive, because on the one hand, you are encouraging people to come across, especially professionals, which I would assume would mostly fall within that category of remuneration. And then you tax them when they get to the island. So definitely not something, I read somewhere that it could be temporary. What is your views on that?
So my view is no tax is ever temporary. So that has been the thinking on it, that it would apply just for 2 or 3 years in this period of need. But the draft legislation has no end date, and I have zero faith in a tax disappearing. You know, once it leads to a lot of revenue, it's generally there for good. However, I don't believe, first of all, I don't believe that it will raise as much revenue as they hope, because I think people will plan around it and structure their salary in a legitimate manner, which reduces the impact. And secondly, I think it will have a negative impact on the FDI that they're trying to attract. So I think it is likely to be temporary, but simply because it is not going to create the revenue, and it is going to disincentivize investment.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, Boris, I mean, on the impact on businesses and owners deciding to move their operations to Mauritius, obviously there's a big push from a South African point of view. A lot of people putting inquiries about setting up and potentially moving to Mauritius. Do you think this will have the negative effect? It will keep people out of Mauritius?
I don't think it'll keep people out. I think investors will just have to tax plan a little bit better when they are moving to Mauritius. Now remember, Mauritius does tax you on a worldwide basis, but also on a remittance basis. You need to remit income in before you get taxed. So there's definitely some planning measures that can take place to just soften that blow. But I don't think it'll stop the investment. I think there's other things that work globally that drive that investment. I mean, especially from South Africa, the weakening rand, economic situation, exchange controls, high taxes. I mean, if we look, the effective tax rate in South Africa at the top marginal level with VAT, private pensions, private medical is quite high, higher than it would be in Mauritius. So I think that will still drive an influx in here from those two jurisdictions that I mentioned, South Africa and obviously from Europe, setting up businesses here. It's still easy to do business. Remember, your businesses are still only taxed at either 15% or 3%. So it's still a win-win. So I don't see that slowing down, but I do see a little bit better planning coming through. And I think, as Keelan has mentioned, look, maybe this won't be there forever, because it's going to hit not only expats' pockets, it's hitting the locals' pockets, those who do earn above 3 million rupees. And that's a lot of business people here. So there might be that feeling that after COVID has been paid for, let's drop it. They did that before. Remember, they raised capital gains tax a number of years ago, and it was aimed at property transactions, and then they dropped it. Eventually, some sort of normality returns, hopefully.
Yeah. And I guess, just to confirm for the attendees, this will only impact expats living in Mauritius, that's settled there and working there on an occupational permit or living as an investor, and it includes your dividends that you get from a trust. Or so it won't impact South Africans that are still living in South Africa and have a trust there. It's only going to be the people that are living in Mauritius. Okay.
Correct. They've got to be tax resident here.
Yes.
So,
okay.
They hit that effect, and you're quite right. It's the dividends coming. Dividends have a wide definition, so it's anything coming out of a trust, foundation, a limited partnership, a company. Is all dividends are all clumped up together as a company definition. Anything dividends. So yeah, that's included in that 3 million. But there's a cap to it. There's a cap to it as well, and I think, as Keelan's mentioned, those earning above 5 million, with livable income, including dividends, the effective tax rate starts dropping off. But the poor guys who are on occupation permits, the professionals are going to have the brunt of this. Probably because there's many of us here. Occupation permits for professionals is probably the bulk of the number of residents in the country.
Okay, no, excellent. Thank you. Hugo, you've been very active and experienced in the field of tax and immigration from South Africa. I'm sure you could share some tips with our South African listeners in terms of what they need to consider when they plan to move or move to Mauritius.
Okay, well, thank you. So let's start with some of the breaking news. I don't know if you guys have seen that the tax law amendment bill was published on Friday. And as promised in the budget speech, financial immigration, or formal immigration as it should be known, will be switched off on the 1st of March. That's only at the moment confirmed by SARS. Reserve Bank has not confirmed they're going to keep to that date. Okay, so we have not seen them sending amendment rules through yet. But SARS will be ready from the 1st of March. Unfortunately, they're moving to a residency test, which says you must be tax non-resident for 3 years. So that makes Mauritius far more attractive than, for example, the golden visas. The golden visas, you are not tax resident in those countries until you pay tax on a worldwide basis in terms of the treaty with South Africa. So therefore, on a golden visa, you're 10 years plus 3 years, 13 years before you can cash out your retirement annuities, if you want to take it out. Where with Mauritius, you can become immediately tax resident, and you don't have that exclusion. So although these taxes sound higher than in the past, it's still lower than what they would pay in South Africa. And the quicker you can get that tax residency basis, even if you have to then pay a little bit more tax. But as Boris said, you can do the pre-planning or pre-immigration planning. And then we can take the funds out after 3 years in the 4th tax year. We will obviously debate this with Treasury, so this is not cast in stone. But I think the important part, to touch on what Boris said, is that the pre-planning becomes extremely important. Because remember that if you have a South African trust and you start vesting the capital gains or the assets after you left for Mauritius, then the capital gains tax is 36%. So in most of my clients going to Mauritius, we actually have to start planning undoing the South African trusts and maybe get an alternative trust. Whether it's a Mauritian trust or not, that is the debate, because the big difference, which I think very few South Africans understand, Boris touched on that. In Mauritius, a trust is a company. Is that correct, Boris? Where in South Africa and all other jurisdictions, it's a trust. So people try and create structures that quacks like a trust, not thinking that when they arrive in Mauritius, they will be taxed as dividends. And they don't have the same conduit principle benefits that they would have in South Africa. So the first thing I would say to South Africans going to Mauritius is look at that South African trust. Should we keep it? The problem we have is that from a estate duty perspective, we still use the word ordinarily resident. So the treaty will take you tax resident into Mauritius. But the minute you take that assets out of the South African trust or the offshore trust or the Mauritian trust into personal name, if you are not breaking ordinarily residents in South Africa, you still have an estate duty. Okay. So avoiding or not using a trust going into Mauritius is also not advisable. Okay. So a lot of people just collapse the South African trust so that they get out of the 36% capital gains tax, but they forget they go into an estate duty problem.
Yeah. Okay. No. And I mean, obviously, we talked about the changes in the solidarity levy that's a negative impact. Do you think, given your feedback now, this will tip the scales for South Africans to go to other jurisdictions? I think you mentioned that the golden visa, it now becomes less desirable, and the option of going to Mauritius is more.
No, so the bottom line for my clients that are facing that, I'm saying to them, and Boris and I have a client like that, where we try to get them tax resident Mauritius as quick as possible, even though they're going to pay that levy. The problem is that levy is not a credit in South Africa. So if you are split and you work that side, work South Africa, and you now are paying that tax, it's not a credit in South Africa. So the important part is make sure you break the tax residency in South Africa. Sadly, give up the family home or the holiday home, so that you have the only permanent home available is in Mauritius, because that makes you, the minute that's the only home you have, that makes you quicker tax resident in Mauritius. So yes, there's a negative, but I think the way to overcome it for most South Africans is to just break their tax residency, because despite that, it's still lower than the 45% they would have paid in South Africa on their foreign earned income.
Yeah, okay.
Obviously in excess of 1.25 million. I know the 1.25 million, but the excess.
Yes, yeah. And I mean, you mentioned the house. Is there anything else that they need to consider other than the house they also need to break tax residence with, or is it typically just the house and the...
I had a consultation this morning with a client on this specific topic, and husband wants to go there, and he's truly because of business expansion, and he has a true business in Mauritius. Wife and children wants to stay here because of the fears of COVID and so on. So I had to first of all tell them that I think you guys have had Mauritius had no cases for a long time, but you're still locked in, but they when they relocate. But the important part is if you want to keep a holiday home in South Africa, or you have a farmhouse, which in their case, it's a family farm, they can't really sell it. There's other brothers and so on involved. The very important part is then to have your center of vital interest in Mauritius. Therefore, wife and kids must move. So one of the other things to look at is now that we are in the COVID era of Zoom education, look at who is providing that education and get your wife and children to fly across. I think the days of daddy just staying there for 2 or 3 months a year and think that he's going to get away and convince SARS. CRS is going to catch you out. There's just so many trigger points where you will be caught out. If you want to go to Mauritius, make it a family decision. Agree with the family. It's a 2-3 year journey. And if it then doesn't work, come back. But this of family sitting, wife in South Africa, husband in Mauritius, or vice versa, it really does not work.
Yeah. All right. No, thank you. Sean, you're probably seeing firsthand all the applications from South Africans wanting to relocate, but other countries as well. Could you tell us a little bit more about what you've seen, any trends you've picked up on the last couple of months or the last couple of years in terms of South Africans and where they want to go to?
Yeah, sure. And thanks for having me on, Jan. This has been a very challenging year with COVID-19, of course, and challenging for everyone. But we've seen, I would say, Q1 and Q2, at least a 60% increase in inquiries coming predominantly from South Africans wanting to move permanently to Mauritius. And I say inquiries because they can't move yet because the borders are closed, obviously. But that's a very, very positive sign for us. But of course, we need to look at the demographics of where these relocatees are coming from. And our relocation company is a local destination service provider, DSP, for some of the world's leading global mobility companies. So we handle people coming out here predominantly on work permits, occupation permits as professionals, whether it be for 3 months, for 3 years, for 5 years. So a lot of our business comes through the global mobility partners that we have. But then, of course, we have relocating families. And I would say at the moment, about 80% of the families that we have relocating here are from South Africa. And we look at the different categories that they come in on. The first being occupation permit as a professional, which is still the biggest one. And of course, for that, you need a job offer in Mauritius to get through that route. A very big one at the moment is the retirement permit. So with everything that Mauritius has to offer, we're seeing a lot of retirees considering Mauritius as not plan B anymore, but a plan A to come and spend their golden years. And that's a relatively straightforward permit to obtain. And I think we touched on some of the criteria earlier to obtain that permit. And then, of course, there are investors that come through to Mauritius to open a business, or set up a structure, or perhaps acquire a business. So that's another category. And then, of course, permanent residence through property purchase. Acquiring a property, we touched on that, so it's going to be reduced to $375,000 US to acquire a property and obtain permanent residency. And that is, for me, that's the only real true permanent residency. So as long as you own that property and hold those title deeds, you can live in Mauritius for as long as you like. So those are the different kinds of folks we see coming through to live in Mauritius.
Yeah, and in terms of which one would you say is the most that you see? The occupational permit obviously is for the professionals coming through, and typically they spend a couple of years there. Not all of them stay on for a long period of time. But the property, buying the property and getting the permanent residence through that's a very popular one. As you said, for South Africans that have the plan B, that now potentially becomes more and more plan A these days.
Yeah, the property one is really picking up with a lot of interest. And our suggestion for anyone coming from South Africa has and always will be is to come out here for a good look-see trip first before investing your money in property, because there's a lot of dog work to be done. There's a lot of looking, a lot of sniffing around to be done beforehand. So come out and on a tourist visa, you're allowed to be here for 3 months at a time, 90 days. Come and spend a couple of months in Mauritius and have a good look around. A lot of people have been very successful in acquiring property here and had some fantastic gains. So over the years, we've always said, well, is this property bubble going to burst? But it seems to be just growing and growing. But that is we're seeing an increase in the amount of people now wanting to come and acquire property here. That's quite a big one.
Yeah, and I think also the options are getting more and more for foreigners. Where in the past it's only been the property development scheme or the IRS scheme where you have to invest 500,000. Now they're proposing to make that 375,000. But now also it becomes accessible to the people with the occupation permit, because now they can also buy into those schemes or into property below that size. It won't give them obviously the permanent residence, but it allow them to stay on the island while they are there. But also now the one where you can buy into the smart city, where you can buy a plot of land, I understand.
I think that one's going to be a winner if that goes through, because South Africans like to build their own houses, and they don't like all the houses looking the same. So I think to be able to buy, I think it's 2,100 up to 2,100 square meters of land in a smart city. That's going to be a winner. So I think that's a very positive change if it comes through.
Okay, so you've been on the island for about 10 years now. Boris, you've been there for 12 years. Keelan, how long have you been on the island?
18 months. Okay. I'm the newest.
So what advice would you all give to potential buyers, potential people wanting to move to the island what are the things that you would say they should consider, and things you don't think of when you plan something like this?
Going through a proper, very thorough cost of living exercise is very important. So planning is critical. Mauritius does tend to be a little bit more expensive than South Africa. There are certainly ways to make living affordable here. But proper budgeting and planning needs to be in place. If you've got kids, get the school applications in early. A lot of the schools, we have excellent schools here, excellent medical facilities, but the schools do get full, so we need to plan that in advance. If you're bringing pets along, we need to look at that as a 6-month planning process because of the tests that are required and so on. And definitely prepare for things like unabridged birth certificates, police clearance certificates. These sort of things take time in SA to obtain. So planning planning is very, very important before the move.
Yeah.
Johan, my advice is, look, I mean, the easiest entry into Mauritius is via your investor permit. So, I mean, if we look at the change now with the investment of $50,000 in a global business license company, you get the permit with all your dependents. I think if wives also work and participate in the general administration of the company, they can also get an occupation permit. And my advice is always look, I think as Sean said, come look, see, but for a longer period. Look, some of the property developments are great, some take too long to build. So I always tell clients, listen, come in as an investor, live here, lease the property. Definitely sell your house in South Africa, right? As Hugo's mentioned, very important. And then come and lease here for 12 months or 24 months until you found the location, the property near schools, and where you want to live. And you've experienced the island life, experienced the weather, the cycles and all of that. And then make a decision to buy. And remember, I don't think it's changed, I think in the new bill, but residence through property acquisition gives you the right to live, not necessarily to work, unless I'm confused and it has changed. But you need the investor permit to live and work. So you can have both permits. So after your investor permit, you find a property or buy the property, you get your residence through that anyway, and then enjoy Mauritius. But yeah, make sure your exit plans are very well formed, as Hugo said. Otherwise, you can have a nightmare of double taxation, all sorts of issues. And I think that's where you just got to get the proper prior planning before you come over here.
Boris, if I can add to that, that's very important, because the property investor visas, people tend to then keep a property in South Africa because they are property rich people. And then they have this vacant house in South Africa, and then you have this conflict. Then the next test is the center of vital interest or habitual home. And that's why the South African home must either be like, if it's a farm, rent it out, get a farm manager to stay in, do something, but you need to go to the next test. Or otherwise do the occupational permit or something that you work, that you can show you have employment and your family is there. Then you're in the second test. So it's very important to understand the differences. And also my problem with the retiree visas at the moment is that SARS are not allowing those people to tax immigrate. Okay, because I think they're not taxed on a worldwide basis. Is that correct? Or they don't get taxed in Mauritius. Is that correct?
They do on a worldwide basis, but only what they remit. So let's say you've got income sourced in Mauritius, you pay tax. But if they had income outside of Mauritius, only if they remitted into Mauritius, then it becomes taxable. So they can. Capital gains, no. So just income. So if they have capital gains remittances, they don't pay tax.
Capital gain is not the test. So you must just be paying tax on the worldwide basis, albeit remittance basis, as long as you are paying tax.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, Boris, you mentioned that the investor permit, you have to put $50,000. Could you maybe just explain that to the attendees? Do you have to put in the amount into a bank account in Mauritius in the company? Can you use that money for business expenses? Exactly.
So yes, you need 50,000 to be placed into the company's bank account. Usually it can be the subscription for the shares. So you could say I'll issue 50,000 shares of $1 each. It should be unencumbered, so you don't have you don't have a big liability against the company. So usually do a share subscription. In a global business license company, you can't use a domestic company. You can only, as non-citizens, only use 2 types of companies, or 3 actually, but 2. is an authorized company or global business. Only the global business will give you the permits, not the authorized. There is another one in the Freeport, a Freeport company if you're doing global import and exports, but I'll discount that. So you need a global business license company, minimum investment $50,000, goes into the bank account of that company. Then you go and do your application with the Economic Development Board to go and get your permit.
Okay, and for self-employed, again, there's a requirement for, I think it's $35,000. Again, it will be similar requirements there.
Similar, open a banking account in Mauritius with some of the banks that don't require high minimums, deposits. So you can use the likes of an ABSA, AfroAsia, something like that. And then introduce that money into that account and then process the application.
Okay, no, excellent. Thank you. Is there any other questions that any of the panelists would still want to answer or add to what we've discussed? All good.
I think Johan, we looked at a lot of the technical stuff about moving to Mauritius.
Yeah.
But if I may add that there's a very big human side to it as well. So the quality of life aspect is something that is very attractive for people moving to Mauritius, and also the proximity, very close to South Africa. So very different to jumping ship to the UK, to Australia, the States, and so on. We're not that far. We're just over the pond, you know. People think that we don't work hard in Mauritius. That's not true. We don't sit on the beach and drink pina coladas all day. We actually work very hard here, but there's a very good work-life balance, which is great. Raising families here, wonderful. There's a lot of activities for kids, and it's safe. It really, really is a safe environment for kids to grow up in, and a wonderful place to retire. And, you know, we are so blessed and so fortunate to be in Mauritius right now. I think the government's done an amazing job in controlling this pandemic that we've had, and life is pretty much back to normal here. We would like to see the borders open so we can all get back to business, but I'm hoping for we're all hoping for some information on that soon. So there we go.
No, excellent. I saw the number of attendees just dropped from 70 to 20 when you said you're not drinking pina coladas and it's hard work.
Can I also add something, Johan?
Yeah.
Although you definitely don't need French to live here, and I've certainly never had a situation where I needed to speak French, I would recommend that if people are looking for a long-term move, and especially if they have young children, that they do consider learning French. A big issue that I've heard with a lot of families who move here and subsequently leave Mauritius is the amount of secondary education that's available. And if your children are able to join the French system, it automatically opens up twice the amount of schools. So it is difficult. For instance, all my children are in French school and moved in last year, and it was a big adjustment. But we find it very worthwhile, and we think that it will make a big difference in terms of our long-term plans for the island. And also just to note that if children finish school in a French system school, they are eligible for free university fees in France, which is well worth considering for those with children.
Yeah, no, definitely. No, great. Thank you for that, Keelan. Yeah, so I think just for the attendees, if there's any questions, please send them through to us on email. We haven't really enabled the Q&A session today, but we'd be happy to answer them if you just reply to the link of the webinar or just send us an email. We'll be happy to look at that, and I'll send it through to the appropriate person on the webinar to address your questions. But yeah, so from our side, that's all we have. I think there's definitely some very exciting changes that they proposed. Hopefully that will come into law soon. We don't know when that's going to happen yet, but we're hoping that will be soon. And I also hope that through the discussions today, there was at least some insight and some information that the attendees could use on making their decision on either moving there or starting to invest there or moving their business there. So yeah, thank you to everybody involved, and hope you have a wonderful day further. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Jan. Bye.